Welcome to the Wealth Matters podcast, where investors come together to better understand how to build passive cash flow and create generational wealth without all the confusing mumbo-jumbo. Here's your host and co-author of Amazon #1 bestseller, Alpesh Pamar.
Welcome to Wealth Matters Podcast. I have with me my good friend, Ian Tudor. How are you, Ian?
I'm doing well. I'm grateful for the invitation on and excited to explore many aspects of real estate with you.
Absolutely. So Ian is a finance graduate from Virginia Tech. He began his career in the financial development program at Genworth Financial. Then he started moving into real estate. He used to write underwrote over $1 billion in acquisition and dispositions at Parkway. Ian left then to start Archimedes Group with Ryan Narus in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I have had Ryan on the podcast as well last year. And I love talking to both of these guys. So, welcome again, Ian.
Absolutely. I appreciate the invitation. Excited to talk all things real estate. And Ryan has said very many positive things about you. So excited to see where this conversation goes.
I appreciate it. So tell us something interesting about yourself, something funny, something which we cannot guess.
From the looks of it. That's a great question. I would say the one thing that most people probably wouldn't recognize from me is that, my biggest thing is I like traveling to relatively rustic places and experiencing those cultures. So for the most part, for the next couple of years, I have trips planned to pretty fun places. Like I'm planning on going to Vietnam and Thailand, as well as parts of South America as well. So that's kind of my next big project, is to enjoy a little bit of the wealth that real estate has created and allow me to go explore the world before I maybe settle down and have a family.
So as long as you don't buy mobile home parks in Vietnam, I'm good.
Yeah, I think I'm U.S. centric for the while. We'll see. Maybe one of these days I'll have some international exposure, but for the time being,
America would have mobile home parks.
Absolutely.
If not Asia.
That's right.
Hey, so how did you get into real estate?
Yeah, so I started in corporate America like a lot of people did. I was not really sure what I wanted to do after college. So I took the first job that I was really accepted at. I applied to quite a few. That was in 2012. And the job market wasn't nearly as strong as it was in some of the years after that. But I got the job, and it was a great experience because I found out what I didn't like. But I was able to find a middle manager and someone who I work for in that position, and they opened my eyes to real estate. I had no idea anything about real estate. My parents are in the medical field, so I didn't really have any exposure to it growing up. So it was a great learning lesson, and just happenstance that I ran into a middle manager who just understood real estate, and he saw the world differently than a lot of other middle managers within corporate America. So a lot of times I would just go in his office and talk to him about wealth creation as opposed to getting my work done. So it was one of those things that my interest took me to where my heart really desired. And through that, I found that real estate was something I was really passionate about. So at 23, I bought my first house with a business partner or a friend in college. And so I rented out the other rooms, lived in the room rent free, which was nice. And it gave me a taste, but I realized I wanted something more. So I started to network with lots of people in real estate, of anyone who I could speak with. And through that, I landed a job in Orlando, Florida, working for a publicly traded REIT, Parkway Properties. So they did Class A office buildings across the Southeast and Southwest. And that was my introduction to real estate.
Okay, no, that's great. So you started investing pretty much at 23, and you basically did house hacking without knowing that it is called house hacking. So
Yeah.
that's awesome, man.
That was, I guess, I mean, Bigger Pockets, I was familiar with it at the
Right.
time, and I spent some time on there. But I would say a lot of my education for real estate is just better on face-to-face interactions. And that was where I learned the most, was from other people that were further down the road and were gracious enough to give me time to speak about all things real estate.
That's awesome. So, from single family house to Parkway, a REIT, and then, but how did you end up in mobile home park space?
Yeah, that was another just investigation over time. I never really knew mobile home parks was a asset class that I could actually invest in until I I bought my first house at 23, and then I moved to Orlando in 2014. So I bought my house in 2013. 2014, I moved to Orlando for this real estate job, and I started to look for another single family house to buy. I said, okay, this makes sense. I already have one. I bought another one. I started looking around in areas, and I couldn't find something that I was looking for. So then I looked into house flipping. I had a situation where I lost like 3 months of cash flow through my single family home because part of the AC went out, the HVAC
Right.
went out, and then my property manager just charged us $700 without telling us. And I was like, this doesn't feel, it doesn't
No,
feel
and
great.
that's the hard part. I love single family, but
Yeah.
it's that you are relying on that one asset, right? And you will have some cash flow, but most of the time people are looking at the appreciation, right? That, oh yeah, it's gonna double and then I'm good, right? But
Right.
you if you have little cash flow and you get AC went out, heater went out, and it's all gone.
Right. So several months, it was somewhat of it just made me realize, okay, maybe I want more units. Maybe I want a little bit more scale here. I looked at mobile homes too, because I said, oh, well, the capital needed to flip a mobile home, just one home,
Right.
maybe within a park or on private land, is so much less than a single family home. So I looked down, but my roommate at the time who I was working with at Parkway, he's like, why don't you buy the whole park? He was very savvy in just institutional real estate. He's like, why don't you buy the whole park? And I said, I don't even know what that means. So I bought some information about it in 2014 and started to realize that there was something here that I didn't see in other forms of real estate, because I worked in office and I realized how much capital you had to raise to buy office deals. And then on top of that, once you own this office buildings, if a tenant moves out, you have large amounts of tenant improvements and leasing commissions that you have
Oh
to pay.
yes, you
That there's
got
a lot
to
more.
again restart, right?
Yeah, just because you buy it doesn't necessarily mean it's
Yeah.
cash flowing. So there was a lot of much more capital, and at the time I didn't start with much money. It's my family. Uh, I was very fortunate that I didn't have to pay for my college education, but there wasn't like a huge amount of money left over for me to go jump into real estate with. It was something that I just realized the amount of capital required to buy a mobile home park was much less than other forms of real estate,
Got
which
it.
started to get really interesting.
So what was your very first mobile home park deal?
Yeah, so my first deal was actually through a broker. I was able to start a conversation in a relationship with a broker who was just coming into the game, didn't have a huge buyers list yet. This was in 2016. I was able to I was helping this broker with underwriting. I was helping with marketing, just saying, okay, I personally don't want this deal, but this is how I would think through it. Like, how would you answer some of these questions? And we had a nice back and forth relationship where I would give, a perspective from a buyer. I got listings before they became listings, so I got
Oh,
opportunities
pocket
to look at
listings.
deals.
Yeah.
It was a nice exchange of value there that we were able to provide. Then a deal came across her table, and I was able to take a look at it, and I called another operator who's no longer operating, but they were a large operator at the time, and I was able to bring them in and put an offer like the day it went on market, and we were able to get the property under contract before before it turned into anything else, because the
Right.
buyer was, or the seller accepted that offer. So for me, I had some insider information which helped me
Right.
to get that first deal, and we closed that in September of 2016, and that was our first deal that we did.
That's awesome. So you mentioned broker on your very first deal. How do you find mobile home park opportunities now?
Yeah, I'd say majority of the stuff we find is off market. So I do a lot of cold calling.
Okay.
We've done 16 deals. Of those 16, 60+% of those have been off market through either mailer or cold call. Majority of those are cold call. Some are through a relationship or two, but I'd say 15 to 20% are brokers. And then the rest is either through, just a relationship, or, like, for example, another operator that may have something that they don't want to put through a whole marketing process and looking to sell. We've done that once or twice in a few deals like that. But for the most part, off market's where we're going, but we're starting to see the value of compounding interest in relationships. So every year, relationships, when you view the long term in relationships, they always surprise me. Every year I look into it, I'm like, wow, I didn't realize that that's how far a relationship could really go. So we're starting to see the fruits of our relationship building over 4 years now, and we're getting more off market, more opportunities from brokers. One we've already closed, another one we have under contract that never hit the market. We were able to do from very reputable brokers, but that took us a while to get there.
Got it. So you mentioned cold call and mailers. How do you have a team cold calling, and how do you get all the details for the mobile home park owners, etc., for sending out mailers? Do you use certain technology?
Yeah, so it's a pretty cumbersome process, but you can definitely one of our edges starting off, I was able to connect with a guy who taught me about building a mobile home park database, and he really helped transform the way that I was able to find opportunities by giving me some of those things, and very generous by giving a lot of that stuff away. And he did that with a lot of people. And so the process is basically scraping a lot of data offline, and then going to the county records, finding the owners of those, then going to the Secretary of State website, finding the LLC, the owner behind the LLC. Yeah. Then after that, you skip trace the number. So we have that for about 1,300 parks around the states that we really focus on. Right. And then we've been cold calling for years on those and building relationships with some of the owners. And when you own parks in the area that you are looking to buy, it's way easier than just being a guy, hey, I'm in California, or hey, I'm in a different state, I want to buy your park. It's like, oh, I'm a fellow owner, let's network. Over time you can build relationships that way. Right. So a little more indirect.
That's a great point. So, of course, you called out California because no. So you're right, though. Sometimes I'm able to make it work, and sometimes they'll say, "Oh, you never owned anything here in this state. Oh, we don't want to sell it to you. Yeah. Can you come down here tomorrow and we can discuss?" Yep. And I'm like, "No, I can't." So yeah, because with Corona and everything, I was just not scared of traveling, but more trying to be safe, right? So yeah, no, I see that point. So how to be competitive in mobile home parks, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about. So yes, you find the park. Now, how do you stay competitive?
So I think the thing that we teach, so Ryan and I, buy a lot for ourselves, but we also have a mentoring business where we teach people how to buy mobile home parks. And the biggest thing we really focus on with people, which I feel like a lot of people don't really spend a lot of time thinking about, is your strategy. So there's a lot of ways to make money in this space, a lot of ways to make money in this space. I feel like a lot of people use the same strategy of, I'm going to buy nationwide, city, water, city, sewer, 100 lots that are up, and I just want stable opportunities. And so if I use that approach, I wouldn't have nearly the amount of parks as I have today. Right. And so we were able just to carve out a strategy where I can buy stuff And I know of opportunities well before the market does, just because I'm much tighter geographically than people going after 20 states. Like, I'm in 3 states that I own in, and I have 3 or 4 larger metros that I chase. And through that, I can just stay competitive there because I contact those owners way more frequently than most people, than if you had, 6 states, 7 states that you're talking to, and 20 MSAs that you're chasing.
Right. No, that's a good point too, and you are so right, because when I started, even in real estate and then in mobile home park, I was just looking all over, right?
Yep.
I was so and that meant that I did not have focus on one particular area or state, as well as I was just trying to figure out, if I acquire this park, what will happen? How am I gonna manage, and how am I gonna do all this? So yes, I also changed my strategy after acquiring, not even after acquiring my first park, but earlier this year, that I'm just going to focus on this corridor. So yeah, and I was already investing in Alabama and Georgia, so I like that area. So my goal was mostly Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, up to North Carolina, the Southeast. And I know you
Hmm.
operate in some of those markets as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it helps a lot. And, early on, it's hard to, and I really adopted that strategy from Parkway, because Parkway was very similar in that way. They were very smart guys who just figured out, they were even more specific. They were down to the asset level on what prices they would pay for certain assets
Right,
within
right.
certain markets. So, like, they were hyper focused on certain markets, and they were highly successful at that. And they were able to, you know, be very, very selective and willing to do things where people thought they were overpaying on certain assets. But the reason they did that is because they had so much built up knowledge within that area and so many built up
Right.
connections, that it was easy for them to make those decisions where other people from the outside would say, this doesn't make sense.
I see. No, that makes sense. So what is your acquisition and infill strategy?
When you say infill strategy, what do you mean?
Like how, let's say you acquired a park, and just an example that 50 lot park with
Mhm.
25 occupied, right? Half of those are park owned homes. Now you got to infill 25 lots. What
Yep.
would be your strategy? What is your usual strategy? Is it park owned home, tenant owned homes, and how are you going to target those tenants?
Yeah, so this is another way where I'd say we differentiate. I don't chase parks with huge amounts of vacant pads. I mean, I put offers and I put things under contract, but and we've purchased some parks that have more vacant pads. Usually, vacant pads. I mean, there's a couple ways you can go about it, right? Is this, you buy a used home, or you can buy a new home to infill that. For me, it's really just depending on the quality of the park and the quality of the area, because new homes, although they upgrade the park, there's a lot of benefits to having them. Not all areas can support them, and your lease up
Right.
velocity might be a lot slower than if you have a better priced home. So for someone to put down, $4,000 and then have a 10-year rent to own or lease option contract, like that is a little bit harder than someone coming into a new home, or sorry, a used home, where that lease option might be you know half that time, and so that they become owners. And also, just from a capital perspective as well, a new home is going to be $40,000 plus.
Right.
All in, a used home is probably closer to 20 to 25. So it's a capital allocation decision as well, which I don't think a lot of people think about it that way, but I definitely do. And I would say, more often than not, we brought in one of our parks, we brought in 12 used homes, just because uh, the all-in basis for infilling the park and getting lot rent was uh, on a just a return basis on the amount of capital dollars we had to invest was much lower. So
Right.
we
Yeah.
we prefer we preferred to go that route. But there's many communities that, if you have a lot of newer homes in communities, bringing in used homes actually brings down the quality of the park. So you'd have to go new homes to make that community work. So I'd say more often than not, we're buying parks that have more occupied units with homes on site than massive amounts of infill projects.
Got it. So you mentioned that. So what is your acquisition strategy then? Because you mentioned that you do not acquire parks with a lot of vacant homes. So
Yeah.
what kind of parks do you target? What's your strategy?
Yeah, we're between 30 and, give or take. Our smallest park is 20, it has 25 lots. It has 37 total. So we could add another 14. But 25, and then our largest is give or take 94.
Okay.
So for us, we really play under the 100 lot for the most part, just because we feel like we can be most competitive there. And then we usually buy pretty heavy park-owned home communities. We feel like those are usually more mismanaged than tenant-owned home communities. So tenant-owned home communities, for the most part, unless if you want to be the guy who wants to be jamming $100 plus lot rents down people's throats, like I personally don't feel good about doing that. Like you can buy an all tenant-owned home community for, a 5-6 cap. If they're of decent size, those are kind of what they're trading for now. The only way you get your return is by really jamming down, really massive rent increases. I've heard of people, putting $150 a month. I just saw a deal today. They're going to do $200 a month rent increases, and it's going to increase $50 a month every quarter next year. And I'm just like, that's brutal.
That's unheard of.
That is brutal. And I just don't want to be the guy who does that. So, I mean, that's not to say that I don't increase rents. I definitely increase rents on my park. I'm a capitalist at the end of the day, but I do have some empathy for some of these residents.
Yes.
That, if you're going to do something like $200 a month rent, like do that over 4 years, like don't do that in a year, like do that over 4, 5, 6 years. And let them know ahead of time so then they can plan accordingly. But putting $200 on someone in a year, it's really hard to move your finances around to accommodate that.
Right. And great point. I remember Glenn Esterson book, Mobile Home Park Manifesto, and there is a term he has coined, empathy capitalist, right? So that's what we are, when we are investing in mobile home park, because everyone wants to make money as investor, right? But we also want to provide a nice, safe neighborhood for people to live in, which is affordable, right? Affordable is the key word there.
Yep.
You don't want to go from 200 per month lot rent to 400 per month in a year, because that's
crazy.
Pretty much kick out most of those tenants. But I want to figure out the park-owned homes, because I bought the park with all the park-owned homes, and that area only supports park-owned homes, right? So you mentioned that you try to buy those parks, of course, because they are mostly mismanaged, and that's where we can create more ROI, right? Without pushing the rent, or doubling the rent, right? So what's your strategy when you acquire those kind of parks with a lot of park-owned homes?
So usually, we don't want to hold park-owned homes long-term, just because older park-owned homes inevitably have pretty high repair and maintenance for the most part. And I would say I don't look at a lot of apartments, so I don't know how true this is, but I wouldn't be surprised if a similar vintage of a mobile home park in a apartment, you probably have higher repair and maintenance on the mobile home park.
Oh yes,
and
I agree.
I don't know if that's true, but I just feel it is.
I do apartments as well, or I used to, right? So you're right, because that's a true real building, right? And you have a lot of the roof and everything is connected, right? So I totally agree.
So mobile homes in general, they deteriorate quicker than a site-built building. They have to travel. They have just a lot of, they're built in factories, which that's not necessarily a negative thing. It's just you have to know what that comes with. So mobile homes in their 70s, most people don't realize, but most mobile homes in the 70s, the roofs were more rounded. They're not apex. And so when you have rounded roofs, and over time you just have large amounts of rain, and sometimes if you had hail, if you had sticks or something fall on the roof, you get divots, and then that's when water starts to settle in it. And it's impossible to keep water out of the roofs, and you constantly have leaky roofs. And I personally don't want to deal with that. So I sell homes to residents for really cheap, well below market value, in exchange for being closer to market rent. So for example, say you have half the park at 200 lot rent, but the real market rent is $300.
Mm-hmm.
So if I sold off those homes, say I immediately even sell some of those for, say those homes are worth $5,000. I sell them to them for $1,500, $2,000, but then now they're at market rent, say at 300, maybe even a little bit higher. Maybe you do like 315, 320. What that does is now you can cap off that higher lot rent. And so when you get an appraisal and you see half the park is at 325, 315, that is going to help your valuation way more than holding onto these homes with a shell value of $5,000. So for me, I'm trying to shift the value to the lot rent as quickly as I can. But the caveat with the strategy is we buy in areas where there's a lot of construction workers who like these homes and do this. A lot of our fixed income people, they don't buy homes because they don't have the money to fix them. So it depends really. Again, this is a geographic strategy that we found that has worked for us. There are also areas where people are just renters, like it's just a renter's market. And it's harder for them to conceptualize the idea of paying to own their own home, because a renter and an owner have a different mentality.
Yes. So when you sell the homes, let's say, $5,000 shell value, and you sell it at 1,500, do you also put it on lease contract, or you ask them to just pay upfront and you are done with it?
So, it depends on the strategy, how many people can actually do this. The downside of this is you will, like most residents, I find maybe a third to maybe a little over a third of residents will actually buy into it. The rest will probably move on. They won't be interested in doing that. So you have to just think through of the best way to do that. But usually I will do that if they're a good renter. The hard thing with buying a park is you're kind of just inheriting everyone that they've screened. And if they're not a very good screener, you can tell up pretty quick. So what you do find out though, is some of these people probably wouldn't got through your screening process, but you realize they pay every month. And so in that scenario, I would do like a rent to own or lease option in the event that I know they're a good payer. Maybe they've been paying 6 months on time. They've never had an issue. And then, I would try to keep it less than a year or two, because if you're trying to push towards a refinance and you still have a large amount of park-owned homes, it's going to hurt your ability to get the right appraisal value for that if you still own a lot of those homes. So for me, it depends on their strategy, but if you're trying to refinance within the 2-year time frame, then I would try to get as many of those park-owned homes off the books.
Oh, that's great. So what kind of properties would you stay away from? I heard your criteria, but you would have certain criteria not to even look at those properties, right?
Yeah, so I would say for the most part, like massive amounts of vacancy. Okay. Although I will say we're breaking our own rules because we have a 150 lot park under contract with 50 lots that are vacant. We were breaking it was so cheap that it made sense for us to that. The price when you're buying something all in for less than $10,000 a pad, it's it's kind of hard to say no to that. But for us, for the most part, I'd say location is really big for us. So if, for example, you sent me a park in Kentucky, it's an automatic no, because I have no interest in being in Kentucky, just because I want to be within driving distance of my portfolio. So my furthest park is about 4.5 hours from me. That's in Knoxville, Tennessee. I'd go to Atlanta again for the right opportunity. And then, maybe I'd go to Richmond, but that's about as far as I go, because I want to be able to say, all right, I'm jumping in my car, going to do something, and I don't have to get in a plane. And that geographically, puts out, so Florida, I don't do anything in Florida. I don't do anything in like the deep South, Texas, Midwest. Like there's a lot of states I don't do business in. So that's a pretty strong and very strict screen that we put in place that we have not broken in. I don't see us breaking anytime soon. The second would be just kind of probably size. So if I just saw a 25 lot opportunity within a market that we already own, but it was 4 hours away and it was very deep value add, for me, it just wasn't enough money to be made for me to have to manage a 25 lot community 4 hours away from me with a lot of just value add. So for us, size is also important depending on the length and distance that I would have to travel in terms of getting that opportunity turned around. So, now that we have a lot more parks, we can be a little bit more selective in terms of making sure that, we are getting the right return on time. And what I mean by that is you can make a lot of money on paper, but if it takes you 60 hours a week to get there, is it really that great of a return? Like you have to always be, and I've learned this from my mentors who have just taught me over time, and very successful guys, that, you can make, say, $600,000 over 3 years, which is great, which is $200,000 a year. But if that stops you from buying any other opportunity, is that really a great use of time? Right. I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe that's all you need. And then you're super happy and you have everything you want. And that's great. I'm trying to build a portfolio. So for me, that would be an epic waste of time because $600,000 isn't nearly as much money as I could make as if I built a portfolio of hundreds of lots and there's a 7-figure paycheck at the end of that as opposed to 1,600.
Yeah, that's a great point. Even I was interviewing someone last week and he brought up the same thing, that not only ROI is important, but ROT is very important, right? Return on your time. Otherwise, you are working like crazy. And you and I, we analyzed so many parks. Just today I had a park I was looking at, and the seller told me, he will take 1.5 million. The NOI is 150 grand. I'm like, 10% cap. Nice. I dig deep and he's the one who is managing. So there is no expense for property management. I don't know what else is, right? And I'm like, are you paying yourself? No. Yeah. So that's not 150 NOI, right?
Yeah.
So that's what it is again, return on your time. So let's take a quick break. I enjoyed so far. So after the break, I'll go through all the usual questions I ask every guest.
You're listening to the Wealth Matters Podcast. The Wealth Matters Podcast. For more info about what we do, check us out at wealthmatters.com. It's wealth, WEALTH, matters, MATRS.com.
Welcome back to Wealth Matters Podcast. I am talking to Ian Tudor, and so far he has just thrown golden nuggets for us about how to be competitive on mobile home parks, what's some of the strategies which we should use in infilling and acquisition. Ian, are you ready for 5 rounds?
Let's make it happen.
Okay, let's go. Would you be changing any business or investment strategy after coronavirus?
No, for the most part, I would say we just double down on this business even more. We'll be, in general, I think we're more encouraged with what we've seen in manufactured housing, mobile home parks after the business. It's held up extraordinarily well.
That's awesome. Favorite real estate or finance or any other related book?
So I love Seeking Wisdom. It's Seeking Wisdom by Peter Bevelin. It's a great book on psychology. It has a lot to do with it also brings in probability and stuff. So it's a great way of bringing in psychology of investing, which we're all emotional investors at the end of the day. No, as much as we want to be unbiased, we have our biases. It talks about psychological biases. And then also it talks about probability and just some basic math concepts that you can incorporate into your investment process to be a better investor.
I'm going to put that in my list now. Any tool or website you recommend or you cannot live without?
Yeah, I would say having a great skip tracing service. So something like an IDI Core where you can get direct to owner is something that has transformed our business because it's allowed us to get deals that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to get.
Oh, awesome. Any advice for beginner investors?
Yeah, I have a lot of advice for beginner investors. We could make that a whole podcast if we really
Right.
wanted to. I say the biggest thing for beginning investors to do is find ways to give value first. So oftentimes a lot of people, including myself, when I first started off is let me pick your brain. And that's totally fine advice, but find which ways you can provide value to people above you, and then you'll have more than enough people who want to do business with you. So if you can basically find the things that they're struggling with and do that for them better, or bring them opportunities. The biggest thing that I learned early on was I didn't have money. I started this business with like $30,000. Ryan started with it around $30,000, more student loan debt than he had capital to invest in this business. So we knew the best value we could bring to the market was finding deals, which is why we decided to go off market. So find the value that you can serve to the market, and you'll be surprised by how many people are willing to talk with you.
Thank you so much, man. How do you give back?
Yeah, so one thing we're starting to do within mobile home parks, which is great, we have a great supply of people who are, the workforce housing. So for the most part, we're doing charity stuff within our community. So for example, for the holidays, we'll be giving away gift cards, randomly to people who pay by a certain amount of time. So then it help a little bit on their Christmas expenses. Also, we've done things. We did a partial college scholarship for one of our managers. And then we've also did just random acts of charity throughout our communities, but we're looking to in the next year to really unify that and have something very consistent where we're either giving groceries or something to help our residents on a very consistent basis, because we have a great population of people who we can help.
That's great. How can my listeners reach out to you?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of ways you can reach out. As I mentioned, Ryan and I have a mentorship program based on mobile home parks. If you'd love to learn more about that, you can email me at info@mobilehomeparkmentors.com. Otherwise, I'm on LinkedIn, so you can look on LinkedIn. Ian, Ian, last name is Tudor, Tudor. Feel free to look at me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on that. And then lastly, if you want to learn more about mobile home parks, feel free to join our free Facebook group, which is Mobile Home Park Mastermind. It's a private group with about 1,700 people plus, growing every day. It's a free group. Lots of great operators in there who are working together to help other people learn about the space. And then lastly, my business partner, Ryan, he puts out a podcast several times a month called Mobile Home Parks in Real Life. And it's a great thing that he's been working on for 2+ years. And he puts his heart and soul into it. And I got to definitely give him a lot of props for how much energy he's put into that, because he's had a lot of great conversation and he puts out a lot of great content.
Yeah, and I'm part of the Facebook group, as well as I listen to, MHP IRL as well. So I would highly recommend everyone to check those out. Thank you so much, Ian.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Wealth Matters podcast. If you enjoyed it, please leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes so others can enjoy the show too. Have a great week and happy investing!